Hello and welcome back. I'm Nicole, a cottage witch, and today I'm doing my December book wrap-up. So I did the Reindeer Readathon for 2024. I was on Team Stalking. You get automatically sorted into different teams. And then there's a prompt for every reindeer. So Dasher was a recommendation, Dancer was a genre that matches your favorite music genre. Prancer was the title is a special event or date, and there are all sorts. There are bonus ones like Christmas tree and Christmas lights and stuff like that. So I did those. Those are my chicken scratch notes. The first one I read for that was I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. She's a Belgian author I had never heard of before until I saw this book on, I want to say Instagram or YouTube, one of the two. It was phenomenal. One of my favorite books of the year. It's so moving. It's, you kind of know what's happening, you don't know what's happening, but you kind of do. And it kind of doesn't matter, but it's kind of suspenseful all the same. It's very strange. I don't know how she did that. But it's beautiful. It's just a beautiful book about relationships and loneliness and what it means to be human, and I loved it. Then I listened to What Lies in the Woods by Kate Alice Marshall. I've got to turn down my, I'm trying to figure out how to use my computer here. Turn down the screen brightness, it was blinding me as I was looking at it. And that was weird. Okay, now my computer's done having a moment. Yes, What Lies in the Woods. Very good, very creepy. Didn't really see the end coming. But I also don't like go out of my way to try and figure out mystery thrillers while I'm reading them. If I can figure it out, then it just wasn't even hidden to begin with. Because I don't usually spend a lot of energy trying to do that. I just sort of enjoy the suspense if it's there, and it was there. It was a really good book. I like that one. Then I read Russian Gothic, which I was going to read for Gothel in November, and then it ended up being in December because what the heck. With this beautiful tragic novel, Skorobogatov has carved a place for himself in the grand Russian tradition. I think he was actually born in Belarus, and I think this was first published outside of Russia because censorship. So basically, there's a couple, their son has died a few years before as a child, and there's another character called Sergeant Bertrand who may or may not be imaginary, maybe a hallucination, maybe he's in a dream. It's really unclear, which is fun. The unknown visitor triggers a precipitous journey into the depths of the human soul. That's accurate. Hailed as a masterpiece of post-Soviet literature. English, available in English for the first time. I need some of this guy's other books to be available in English because this was really good. It was disturbing and bizarre, and I'm not really sure what happened. Like, it's strange, but it's really good. A complex portrayal of grief, misogyny, violence, and love. I would say less love, more obsession, and love disguised as wanting to own a person, which I don't view as love, but you know, different folks. Black droll humor. Sometimes I think I missed that. Maybe I need to reread it for the humor. It is one of these books where you're not entirely sure if the guy's just having a psychotic break, if the whole thing's a dream, if it's actually happening in some sort of magical realist sort of world. It's really unclear, but that's kind of what I like about it. There is a lot of violence. There's a lot of violence towards women, one woman in particular. It's not pretty, and you really do get into their heads, very Crime and Punishment style. So yeah, that was fun. Fun, maybe not quite the right word for it, but interesting. It was fun in the way that Crime and Punishment was fun. Then I read Pine by Francine Toon. This is a literary Gothic thriller to chill the marrow. I'm not sure it was super literary. It was a Gothic thriller, well, Gothic suspense, murder mystery, sort of, well, maybe murder, crime, bloody Scotland crime debut of the year. A simmering Gothic thriller. It is disconcerting. It's very eerie and atmospheric, which I liked. So it's set in the Scottish Highlands, in a small village surrounded by forest. When a woman stumbles onto the road one Halloween night, Neil, I don't know if that's how you say his name, drives her back to their house. In the morning, she's gone. And also, people can't remember having seen her. So you're not sure if she's real or not either. Laurin, his daughter, looks for answers in her tarot cards. She does witchy things. Her mom, who vanished like 10 years earlier or something, was quite witchy. So she does very witchy things, which was really fun. And the kid is in like grade 6 or something. So it's got a lot of like coming of age awkwardness, which is fine. Wasn't my favorite part, but also I empathize. That's not a fun time in life, particularly if you've lost your mom and she was known for being a witch and people think you're weird. So in a place that can feel like the edge of the world, Toon brilliantly captures the wildness of rural childhood and the intensity of small-town claustrophobia, uniting the chill of the modern Gothic with the pulse of a thriller. Yeah, it was quite good. I'm not sure it's quite thrillerish, but it is mystery, suspense, eerie, witchiness. Yeah, it was fun. Then I read, so this was for my read around the world as well. Oh, so was the one from Belgium. I who have never known men. Drago, Jančar. I saw her that night. He's from Slovenia. So it's set during World War II, and the main character is a soldier. Well, sort of one of the main characters. It's a bit weird. It goes back and forth in time a little bit because he is a soldier who trains this young woman, Veronica, to ride a horse, and they fall in love, etc. And then she leaves, and it's World War II, and so you don't know what happened to people. People just disappeared. Yeah, it wasn't my favorite book. I didn't really, I don't know, maybe I missed something in translation because a lot of other good reviews talked about like how emotionally moving and stuff it was. I didn't get that in the English one because I didn't really connect with the characters so much, but maybe that was just me. It was interesting, but it wasn't my favorite. Then I read Winter Solstice, an essay by Nina MacLaughlin. This is basically a prose poem, and my books are full. Good. Nobody could have predicted that would happen. Okay. What was I saying? Prose poem. It's an essay. It's a series of short essays, or an essay broken up into 5 segments, with an addendum called Plant Matter, which is fun. Wintry plants. So I'm a fan of that. It's beautiful. Her writing is just beautiful. I'll have to read the Summer Solstice one because that exists as well. The year is fading, light is fading. Solstice means sun stilled. It's a wild sort of stilling, a thrashing, frenzied sort of stilling, a stopping of time, demetering, a holding of the breath as the tension builds, as the dark expands until it cracks and the light drives in. That's the hope. So yeah, that was fun. Oops, what am I doing? I saw her that night, Winter Solstice. Thud. Okay. Les deux tours, the 2 towers. I listened actually to the audiobook of this because I wanted to go faster, because I'm a slow reader in French, but I can read more than I can understand, so I'm trying to improve my listening comprehension, which is so-so. And but it's really fun, and the audiobooks are great. The audiobook narrators. I tried listening to Harry Potter, which I really was hopeful about because it's really fun to listen to, and I've read the books a couple times in French, but the narrator drove me absolutely up the wall. But this narrator is really, really good. So I'm listening to the 3rd one now, and it's super fun. It's not, I think I've reached the point. What point have I reached? Pippin has just gotten Gandalf to save Faramir, is what's happened from his father burning him alive. That's the part. All right. Anyway, before more books fall over, I read The Mistletoe Mystery, which is this cute little, skinny little novella. It's The Maid, and I read the first 2 books in the Maid series. The 3rd one's coming out next year, I think. Molly Gray is a very, to me, autistic-coded character. And so the first 2 books were murder mysteries, I think. Or a murder with other types of crime thrown in. This one is spine is crinkling, sorry. This one is a lower stakes sort of mystery novella, cozy Christmas situation. And it's just cute. It's so cute. I like it. And then I listened to Knife by Salman Rushdie, which was his recollections of being stabbed by the guy who attacked him at the Chautauqua events, and his recovery, his therapy. They didn't know if he was going to live. Some of it's his wife's, his recounting of what his wife went through as well, and thoughts on censorship and thoughts on extremism. It's really good. He has an imaginary conversation with his attacker about the whys, and that was possibly the best part. I gotta read more of his books. So clearly his attacker was unsuccessful on more than one count, because not only is he still alive, but more people are reading him now, so kudos to him, I guess. Okay, so that was the readathon. Non-readathon. I went through like 2 weeks in December of, let's say, fun with mental health. And so I binge listened to mystery thrillers at a ridiculous rate, which was my coping mechanism, which, I mean, could be worse, right? I figure that could be worse ways to cope with life, because the world is ridiculous, if you noticed. So I listened to these 3, Snowblind, Blackout, and Nightblind by Ragnar Jónasson. I might be on an Icelandic author reading kick this year, because, I'm going to Iceland, and they're a very literary country. So yeah. So I've read these 3. They're really fun. They're not as fun as Yrsa Sigurdardóttir. Like, it's hard to tell with books in translation, so I don't know if it's the translator that she's got who's exceptional, or her writing is just, I don't know, I prefer it. Especially her standalone books are gorgeous and atmospheric and wonderful and really creepy. But even she's got a couple more like serialized procedural type crime, I don't know what you call them, losing words. Good. While talking about books, it's going well. Anyway, I like them better. These are fun though, so the next time I need to compulsively read mystery thrillers, he's got some more in that series. Then I listened to A Good Daughter by Karin Slaughter. I'd never read Karin Slaughter before. She's another one of my like future go-tos. I'll get to her more later. I really like that one though. A Woman Alone by Nita Laurin was really interesting. I liked it. I liked the weird kind of creepy AI components. Not sure I bought the ending, which was too bad. Kind of the same with The Girls in the Garden. The ending was weird on those 2, and I'm just not sure it was plausible enough. Like, I do realize they're murder mysteries, like, most of the things that happen in most of them are not plausible. But I don't know, something about my disbelief was not sufficiently suspended, I suppose. I didn't finish one by Lisa Jewell called The House We Grew Up In, because, my God, it was basically a soap opera. The drama. I mean, at some point, people just have to grow up an adult. I couldn't handle it. And then I read more Karin Slaughter. So I read some standalones of hers, Pretty Girls, Pieces of Her, and Girl Forgotten. And then I read Triptych and Fractures, which are the first two in the Will Trent series. And I really like him as a character. It's a police procedural, but it's not, it's got its own quirks that keep it interesting. And apparently it's a TV show, which I'll have to check out. And also I'll definitely read more of those as well the next time I need more books to read, because yeah, I really like Karin Slaughter. There is a lot of violence in her books. Some of it's quite graphic, quite a lot of it's against women, so, you know, be forewarned. I read another Tana French book. I think she's Irish, The Hunter. I'd read the first one with these same characters 3 years ago and could hardly remember anything, but it started to come back to me as I listened to this one, and it was good. I like her books. I've got to read more of her too. I read The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. This one was all over social media as well, because the cover design was brilliant. And the premise is really interesting. The execution was only so-so. Some of the characters were just obnoxious and annoying in a burn the world down, eat the rich sort of way. They're just like, I'm sorry. I'll have sympathy for people when their child goes missing regardless, but I'm not going to have sympathy for the other sorts of quote-unquote hardships of somebody's life when they're millionaires. Like, they can cope, right? Anyway, what they view as hardships. It's national crisis. Anyway, yeah. The point is, my sympathy for millionaires has limits. I will sympathize for missing kids, but very little else. So some of the characters were annoying for that reason. And the ending also wasn't very plausible. It was interesting. Kinda, part of me liked it, part of me was like, really? So, I don't know. Girl A by Abigail Dean is based on a couple of true crime stories of, I think the one was in California, maybe two in California, about kids who were kept in like houses of horror or something like that, where they were chained to beds and malnourished and tortured and all these sorts of horrifying things. Anyway, Girl A is the main narrator of this one book. And it goes through by the different kids, boy A, girl B, boy B, etc. Through, I think there's 7 of them. And you sort of get to know her more through her interactions with her siblings and the various traumas they still have and their various coping mechanisms. It's pretty difficult to read in some way. Like, there's some things that are discussed and flashbacks. So there's some of the violence on the page, but most of it is the violence of psychologically not being able to cope with the world after that. So yeah. But it was pretty good. It was a good book, but it's a disturbing book. What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher is also disturbing in a totally different way. It's a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Poe, and it's really good. I like her writing. She's a good writer. She's very versatile. She can write in a lot of different styles. This one didn't have the same sort of snarky humor that some of the other books do, but because it was written in more of an old-fashioned language, slightly old-fashioned, not super old-fashioned. It's got a really interesting, the main narrator I think is like non-binary or something in this sort of slightly magical fantasy world that's overlapping with this world. Anyway, I liked the narrator. And the main culprit, you kind of know this early on, so it's not really a spoiler, is a fungus. And so it gets weird, and it gets a little gross, and a little creepy. You kind of know what's happening, but you don't quite know the extent of different things. And that's really all I can say without spoiling it. But yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed that one. Then I listened to, and I think, sometimes I just listen to things at the wrong time. Christmas, I think, was the wrong time to listen to Going to Meet the Man, Stories by James Baldwin. I love Baldwin's writing. It is gorgeous. It's brutal and horrible. Like the things, he gets to the heart of what it's like to be a black man in America, which is to say, really spectacularly unpleasant sometimes. Like, you're really not treated like a human being a lot of the time. And so a lot of these stories are young black men trying to figure out how to feel like men, like human, and not always succeeding, to the damage of their own mental well-being and sense of self and all that. So but his writing is so beautiful, and he was brilliant, honestly, brilliant writer, by turns haunting, heartbreaking, and horrifying, and informed throughout by Baldwin's uncanny knowledge of the wounds of racism. Uncanny knowledge of the wounds of racism has left in both its victims and its perpetrators. Going to Meet the Man is a major work by one of our most important writers. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I think if I'd read it at a different time of year and a different frame of mind, I would have enjoyed it more. But I'll keep it and maybe reread it one day. Because yeah, he's a favorite author. I like him. Then I read, this is also one of my favorite books of the year, The Cambridge Companion to the Brontes. I love the Brontes. The Brontes are some of my all-time favorite authors. I've read Jane Eyre probably 3 times. Wuthering Heights maybe 3 times now. The other ones I'm starting to reread. So I reread, I might as well get this out now, The Professor, which is probably my least favorite Bronte book. I still like it, but it's not my favorite. It feels like she was exploring her writing abilities in this one. And yeah, I didn't love it as much as like Jane Eyre. And I'm gonna read Villette and Shirley again this year. And also Anne's books, Agnes Grey and Wildfell, Tenant of Wildfell, I don't know how to pronounce that, Hall. Anyway, this book starts out with their kids. So it's a bunch of different essays by different people. There's a chapter on their juvenilia, on their poetry, on the first 3 books to be written. The Professor, Agnes Grey, and Wuthering Heights. There's the second one then, the second one about their novels. That was not very clear. Jane Eyre and the Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and then Shirley and Villette. Then there's some other essays on different themes. So ideology, personality, and the Bronte characters. Women writers, women issues. The Brontes and religion. That was really interesting. And the Bronte myth. My favorite one was by Stevie Davies, who's a British author, I think, who I've never even heard of before, but I'm gonna have to read more of her book because that essay was so beautiful. Like, it was actually beautifully written in its own right. And it was, yeah, just so much fun. I'm not unbiased on this front because, yeah, I love the Brontes. I've read like 3 Bronte biographies, and just bought a couple that I'd read before and will be rereading again. So in the lit fic category, oh yeah, This Is Happiness by Neil Williams it's one of the most gorgeously written books I've read this year. The language is beautiful. I'm still listening to it, but I'll finish it by the end of today. So I'm recording this on the 31st. And if I finish it today, that'll get me to 366 books, which is 1 for every day of the year, which is the most I've ever read in a year. But part of that is due to, as I said, fun with mental health and binge reading things instead of binge watching shows. I binge read books. And also, I don't have kids, and so that's one huge time saver right there. So I just come home and put on an audiobook to make supper and then read in the evening. It's great. Highly recommend. I forgot to mention, for my read around the world, I read books from Belgium, Slovenia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Nepal this year, which got me to every country in Asia, which is very exciting. I don't think I'm going to finish reading around the world next year, but I think in 2016 I can, which would make it 10 or 11 years, I think, an 11-year project. That's not too bad. It might be a 12-year project. Anyway, where was I on my list? Oh yeah, This Is Happiness. It's stunning. his use of language is magnificent. And it's really insightful as well. It's very thoughtful and moving, and sometimes a little sad, and sometimes a little funny. And it's a glorious book. I'm really enjoying it. I will have to read more of this Neil Williams. He's an Irish author, and it's a very Irish book, but it's beautiful. Love it. Back to the reading around the world front. Stone Dreams is the book from Azerbaijan that I read. This was really good. The introduction that I read, so it had an introduction or a foreword about the author's life, which I don't always read, but in this case I did because his life is so interesting. He's basically under house arrest in Azerbaijan now for writing, and his crime is writing this book with empathy towards Armenians. Tragic, right? Let's get along with our neighbors. No, can't possibly have that. So anyway, he's a writer, playwright, novelist, editor. I think this was published in Russian first because he couldn't publish it in Azerbaijan. He wrote it in the Azerbaijani language, Azeri, I think it's called. Yeah, his native Azeri. And then it was published first in Russian, translated from the Russian into English with consultation with the author, because there was no published Azeri version. So it's a bit of a weird process, but you know, censorship and oppressive governments will do that to you. Since 2016, he's lived under basically house arrest, so like a decade. I think PEN International has supported him or tried to support him. But yeah, his crime, they mocked up some not so credible charges against him, but everybody kind of knows that his real crime was treating Armenians as human beings in his novels. And this one really does. So it's Azerbaijani characters and set in the last years of the Soviet Union. There's an actor who's in the hospital and ended up in the hospital because he was trying to protect an elderly Armenian man from a gang of young Azerbaijanis. So there have been some really, really racist attacks, as I understand it, on Armenians who live in Azerbaijan by Azerbaijanis. Because the borders, the modern borders in the Caucasus don't always correspond perfectly to people's ethnicities. So there are Azerbaijanis who live in Armenia and Armenians who live in Azerbaijan. Most of the people have moved to the separate countries now because it's just not safe. And because there have been wars, I think, or conflicts of some sort between the two. I mean, this is also the region of Georgia and South Ossetia, I think it's called, and Chechnya, and one other region that's disputed. So there's a lot of disputed territory in this region. There are a lot of tensions, I guess you could say, between Armenians and Azeris, because there's sort of Christianity versus Islam as well. Not that I think those two have to be opposed to each other, but politicians will use them, you know, as you do. So Sadai, the character here, the actor, is something of a modern-day Don Quixote. That got me interested. Who has long battled the hatred and corruption he observes in contemporary Azerbaijani society. Wandering in and out of consciousness, he revisits his hometown, the ancient village of Ilis, where Christian Armenians and Muslim Azeris once lived peacefully together, and dreams of making a pilgrimage of atonement to Armenia. So there have been crimes on both sides, as I understand it. However, the crimes against the Armenians seem to have been the more violent and severe, if we're like keeping score in that way. So sometimes Armenians have viewed this as like a pro-Armenian book, when really it's just a pro-humanity, can we not just live as neighbors sort of book. It's fascinating. This book was my Armenian book. This was a fail. This is a spectacular fail. I got it because the way it's described is so interesting. Referred to as cobra poison and the work of the Antichrist by international religious figures, and as anti-literature by the author. It's an incendiary and energetic tour de force that mercilessly skewers religion, national identity, economics, gender, social mores, and above all, the very structure of language itself. Well, that last part is accurate, because there is no structure of language in this book. It is... I'm seriously not even sure it's English. Like, all the individual words are English, but trying to find anything coherent in this book, I couldn't do it. It was completely incomprehensible. So I need to find a new book for Armenia. So at the moment, that's counting as my book from Armenia, even though I didn't finish it. I will one day find another one. I have a potential. And then the last book from Asia that I read was Arresting God in Kathmandu. This is a book of short stories by Samrat Apedye. Apologies. Born and raised in Kathmandu, came to the United States at 21. Lives in Cleveland now, where he teaches. I mean, when this was printed, which was a while ago now. Let's see, yeah, 2001. These stories break the heart and fill the mind because they are so marvelously shrewd in craft, and because the author is unafraid of the harder truths no amount of distance can dull. Not because, as exotica, they take place in a world alien to the parochial kind we are. It is fiction that haunts as much as it instructs. It's quite good. It's not it's not one of my top favorite books of the year, but it was really good. I'm glad I read it. I didn't realize the ways in which... So I am not really knowledgeable about all the ins and outs of Indian culture, but there were a lot of things in this book that were like, I had to remind myself that it was a Nepalese book and not an Indian book, because there were definitely... There seems to have been some overlaps in culture, and sometimes language and music and just all sorts. And the stories, though, were really moving. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about that one. What else did I read? Okay, sorry, that looked really funny. I was looking at my computer. The Literary Witches Oracle is super fun. I've recycled. Got distracted by the pigeons on my balcony, as usual. I don't use the cards that are like broom, cauldron, those sorts of things, because they don't really do anything for me. There's like a snake, and yeah, sure. But there are just a lot of interesting women, and it was really interesting to read just little blurbs about all of them. And it's got recommended reading, so I've looked up some of these books. A fair few of them I've read, but not all of them. So I've got Anne Carson now. And there are a couple others I've added to my list of books to read, which is fun. Okay, then I listened to a few more nonfiction audiobooks. Language. It failed me for a second there. Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us, was just really fun. I mean, it wasn't really revolutionary to me, but I've worked in the arts for 20 years, so it wasn't going to be revolutionary to me. But it goes through some of the sort of neurobiology, I guess, of what the arts do to your brain as far as people can tell, and how they might change your life. And it's just quite lovely. That Librarian, The Fight Against Book Banning in America by Amanda Jones was really good. She has been through it, the ringer. Book banning in the US has gone just completely nuts. Like, there's always been book banning in both the US and Canada. That's always been a thing. But it's never been as bad as it is right now in the US, I don't think. Or people don't get as vicious about it. And I mean, the internet doesn't help with that, because people can be semi-anonymous and just so violent online. And so she's been accused of all kinds of horrifying things that of course she didn't do. And all she really did was go to a town hall meeting and say, look, if you don't like a book, we don't have to ban everything outright, and we don't have porn in the library. We do have a book review process. So if there's a book that you're concerned about, you can go through this review process, fill out the little form, and then whatever the next steps were in that case. Like, it could be removed, it could be moved from a young adult to an adult section. whatever the case may be. And after that, there's a small group of people, and I think she's from Georgia, but maybe Alabama. I always get those southern states mixed up, so sorry about that. I'm Canadian. The vitriol she had to deal with after that was astonishing. And basically there's a small group of exceptionally loud and obnoxious people, led by one man in particular, whose name I can't remember, who just relentlessly attack her with the most outrageous, like, clearly false claims on her character and her past actions, which are, like, they're so easily disprovable with, you know, facts, which don't seem to matter to these people anymore, who are protecting our children, except they're really not, because, like, half of them are being charged with assault of minors. So there's that. But it's, anyway, point is, it's a very big problem. She's been put through the ringer. It's a really instructive book, I think, because there are going to need to be more people standing up against book bans throughout the US and probably Canada as well. And so it's useful to have a record of her experiences to know what could happen, what has been tried, if that does happen, what has worked, what hasn't worked, that sort of thing. And her honesty was really refreshing as well. Like, she used to be Republican just because she was born in the southern states and her family always voted Republican, so she always did too. And so she did talk a little bit about politics in this book, but they've just gone, like, right off the deep end. I don't get it. Mystifying is what that is. So anyway, then there were a few Great Courses books that I listened to. I always like those, and sometimes, like, every month there are certain ones that are free. I mean, free. They're not really free. They're included in Audible. So if you have an Audible membership, they're included. And these were ones that were going to stop being included by the end of the month. So I listened to Thinking About Religion and Violence by Jason C. Bivens. That was really good. That was my favorite one, I think, because he, you know, usually, like in the news, when you're talking about either violence or religion or both, you don't get a lot of nuance. You get a lot of vitriol. You get a lot of emotion. You don't get a lot of thought or care. And there was a lot of both in this sort of lecture series. And it was really interesting and really wide-ranging as well. You know, like, he's not targeting specific religions or anything. He talks about Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, all the major religions, and a few others besides. And the ways in which people have, like, used or abused religion to violent ends. People have been on the receiving end of religious violence from other religions. It's a mess, and we've really just got to start treating each other like people. That'd be nice. Then I read How Jesus Became God by Bart Ehrman. Now, he has a book of the same name. This was the lecture series that he did after he wrote that book, I think. So, but it was really interesting. He basically outlines the different ways that Jesus was perceived from the time that he was alive, as far as we can have still records, to about 200 years after his death, which was pretty well when he became considered the same as God in most versions of Christianity, and the various, like, mutations of ideas throughout those 2 centuries. It's really fascinating. Creation Stories of the Ancient World was also really fun. It's much shorter, and but yeah, there's just some interesting overlap between the Christian stories I grew up with and some of the older Sumerian, Babylonian, etc. stories from that same region or nearish. The Rise of the Novel was the last Great Courses lecture series I listened to. It was okay. It was some stuff I already knew. There were a few novels I didn't know, so I had to write them down. But, you know, it goes through some of the main ones, like Don Quixote, which I liked, and Tom Jones, which I didn't. the author of this really likes Tom Jones. Not the book for me. Middlemarch, I did like that one, but I had to be in the right mood or frame of mind for that, because it goes at a very leisurely pace through the English countryside. Okay, and then the last one I read was, whoops, what did I do? Oh, there we go. Disability Intimacy, edited by Alice Wong. So it's basically a collection of essays about various forms of intimacy in conjunction with a whole variety of disabilities. It's really wide-ranging as well, which I appreciate, because disability is not so constrained. Like, people think wheelchair or bedridden or whatever, you know, and people's imaginations don't go much farther than that unless they have direct experience. So it was really interesting to have so many different perspectives from different people with all sorts of different disabilities and all sorts of different takes on what intimacy means for them. Some of it was sexual, some of it was not. There was a whole range in that sort of, I guess you could say, spectrum as well, which was really cool. But yeah, it was a beautiful book. And, you know, if more people were to read books like that and just treat people better, I could live in a world like that quite nicely. With that, those are the books I read in December. One of these days, maybe when my phone has stopped acting up, I will do my favorite books of 2024. But that's a future video. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.